Welcome to our 300th episode. This is 6 years in the making. It's taped before a live studio audience. To put in perspective, I Love Lucy and Seinfeld, they both had about 180 episodes each. Cheers had 273 episodes. So we're still young compared to like the 768 episodes of The Simpsons, which is 35 seasons, and really young compared to 60 Minutes, which has had over 2,500 episodes. 56 seasons. But we're here with a special message tonight. Now, we got a long ways to go before we can reach what 60 Minutes has done, but we'll work to bring you every week powerful, helpful, and important information. To honor this occasion, my colleague Mike Carter will join me, and we're going to give a special episode, which is a talk that we gave at the Republican Convention in Texas to talking about pirate money. Now, we've given this talk a few times. I wanted to share it with you, but I also want you to know it starts with a Bible verse. Proverbs 22:3, Proverbs 27:12. They say the same thing. When God says something twice, when he says it twice, you better pay attention. He says it once, you ought to pay attention. But Proverbs 22:3 and 27:12 say, a prudent man sees danger coming and he prepares for it. But the fool, they go blindly on and they suffer the consequences. Look, America has been around, almost 250 years, right? 1776 plus 250 is 2026. Here we are just 2 years shy of our 250th birthday. What's scary, though, is something that historian Arnold Toynbee said in a 12-volume magnum opus he called A Study of History. And he said, great civilizations are not murdered. Instead, they take their own lives. Unfortunately, that sounds a little bit like what we're experiencing here in America right now. You know what the average age of an empire is? Well, according to the Times Standard out of London, the average age of an empire is a mere 250 years. They looked at all of the empires, and they said, how long do they last? They last about a quarter millennia. And again, we're 2 years shy of that. Now, what's scary to me about this is America is not intended to be an empire. When the founders got together and met, they weren't wanting an empire. They were wanting a place where liberty could flourish. They didn't want it to be about a nation. They wanted it to be about people. And the nation, the government, was supposed to protect, preserve, and defend the liberties that God had given them so that they could go build and bring peace to mankind, so that they could bring prosperity to mankind, so they could have innovations. But the founders thought about things like putting intellectual property rights into the Constitution, invention rights in the Constitution. This was about the people. It was never supposed to be about a government. They wanted to keep the government out of the way. I had the privilege in my life once of meeting President Ronald Reagan. And I spent time with him, and you know what he said? And pardon the language, but it's what he said. I said, thank you, Mr. President, for doing the great things you did for our country. He said, well, all I did was get government the hell out of the way so you good people could do the things that you do. That was what brought prosperity to America. That's not what we're seeing now. What we're seeing now is we're seeing a decline of civilizations. In fact, great empires, why did they die? Rome was a great empire. Why did it collapse? It collapsed because they debased the money. Now think about that. In Rome, they had a denarius coin. It was like 100% silver. 200 years later, it was like 0% silver. Here's a quote from history. Whenever Rome faced a money crunch, the emperor, starting from Nero, would simply debase the coinage to pay debts, acquire resources, finance projects, and last but not least, enrich insiders. Do you think that's going on in Washington today? That's exactly what we're seeing. And so what happened is, you can see a chart. The silver content of Roman denarius goes from 100%. 200 years later, it's 0%. And you know what they called it? The Roman soldiers, when they got paid, they'd listen to a coin. They'd drop a coin and they'd hear it, and they'd know if it had silver or not by the sound that it made. So you drop a coin, it makes a certain sound. They would say if it made the right sound, that was sound money. That's where the word came from. Sound money was the silver content was in it. And when they knew it was fake metal, then they knew it wasn't sound money. And that's why the Roman Empire collapsed. Did you know a Russian studies professor in the year 2008 was quoted in the Wall Street Journal saying America is going to end? He actually literally said it's going to split apart into 5 separate countries. That's a little scary to think about in 2008. Why would you say that? I'll tell you in a little bit exactly why he said it, and then you tell me if he was wrong. Okay, my background is I have 4 decades in the investment industry. But in 2008, I saw something very strange happening in the financial markets. You remember that, 2008, what it was like? If you can remember, you remember on a Friday, you'd go home and you had money in one bank. It's bank, A. And when you wake up Monday morning, you get a newspaper headline that says Bank A's gone out of business and Bank B's taken its place. And all of a sudden, you had all these different names, changes of banks. Why? Our financial system almost collapsed. Why did it collapse? Well, I was hired by the Pentagon. I pointed out that there was financial terrorism and economic warfare taking place, and it collapsed because other nations were targeting our nation. And there was a lot insiders that were enriching themselves. And you put those 2 things together, it's a dangerous combination. That's exactly what happened in 2008, and that was just the beginning. When I told the Pentagon this is what was going on, they looked at me like, what are you talking about? Financial terrorism, economic warfare, we don't know anything about that. And I said, this is crazy. How come the admirals and generals don't understand that another nation could take America down simply by hacking and crashing our stock market or doing something else that undermined our economy? We used to know this. We used to do it. In fact, that's how President Reagan beat the Soviet Union, was economic warfare. And we'd forgotten it. Why? Because when Bill Clinton came into office, he separated national security from economics. He said, you two never talk, and separated them. He said, because we have the strongest military in the world, and their job is to make sure that we're able to take our corporations around the world, and we are globalists now. He never thought that maybe the other side would use economics to attack us. And so we lost that skill set. So in 2008, a money manager out of Texas, me, writes into the Pentagon and says, hey, we've seen evidence of financial terrorism. And whoosh, I get swept into Washington, D.C. Marnie goes with me with the girls, and she says, I don't know what's going on here. A limo shows up, and I'm staying at the hotel with our 2 little babies, and a limo shows up, and you get in the limo, and I don't even know. It's all hush-hush. They take your phones away and all this. I don't even know if you're coming back that night. And well, I did. I was hired by the Pentagon to be their economic warfare consultant through a group called Special Operations Low Intensity Conflict. I worked with the Office of Net Assessment of the DIA, the CIA. General Flynn, the famous General Flynn, he called me into the DIA as an economic warfare expert. But not just him, his predecessor, General Burgess, and his predecessor's predecessor, General Harry Soyster. So I got to talk to the best and the brightest about economic warfare, the top in the FBI, CIA, and everything else. And finally, I tried to convince them we're in an economic war. They didn't believe me at first. I said, China's our enemy. They said, no, China's our friend. They fund us. They're our bankers. I said, no, I'm telling you. So I had the privilege and pleasure of sharing that with them. It's a scary message, but it is a message that I had, and I firmly believe, and that's why we started the Economic War Room, to help people learn that we're in an economic war. And it's not just going to impact you at the national level, it's impacting your personal finances as well, whether you have higher or lower interest rates, or whether the stock market goes up or down, or whether you're even able to get a loan if you need a loan, or where you invest, or whether your business survives or not. This is economic warfare. Since then, we've started, I've written actually 4 best-selling books, including the latest book, which is called Pirate Money. The first one was Secret Weapon, then Game Plan, How to Protect Yourself During the Coming Cyber Economic Collapse, and then According to Plan, and then Pirate Money. And we started this TV show, and that was 300 episodes ago. And we're on Blaze TV. We're wherever you get podcasts. You can get us a lot of different places. Anyway, I'm going to share with you 5 undeniable truths. Tonight, this is the message. There are 5 truths. I believe I'm going to convince every one of you of every one of these truths. And these are debt path, targeting our currency, inflation, weaponizing currency, money changing forms. I think I'm going to convince you of all 5 of them. And when I do, then I'm going to bring you to one inescapable conclusion. And that is, we're in an economic war, and that economic war is going to destroy us unless we alter course. both personally and at the national level. So let's talk about the 5 undeniable truths. Our debt path is unsustainable. By the way, I had the privilege of testifying in Kansas for some legislation, and I mentioned that our debt path was unsustainable. And there was a guy sitting in there, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to out him, I won't name him, but he's a legislator, and he's a general, and he got up and he just, those economists, our debt path is unsustainable. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Literally, that's what he said. I'm like, okay, Mr. General, I will convince you. Give me the opportunity. Don't listen to Kevin Freeman. Let's listen to the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. His name is Jerome Powell, and he said on 60 Minutes, we're on an unsustainable fiscal path. Bottom line, it's impossible. We cannot continue to rack up debt at the rate we're racking it up and be sustained as a nation. It is unsustainable. I'm going to prove to you beyond what Jerome Powell says if that's not enough. And I'm going to show you, when I wrote the book Pirate Money, it was a year ago today, I sat here at Liberty Hawk and I wrote the book Pirate Money, and I pulled from the usdebtclock.org, the U.S. national debt 1 year ago exactly was $32,114,281,964,125. So I looked at it yesterday. 1 year later, $34,849,459,930,159. Over $2.7 trillion higher than just 1 year ago. Do you think that's sustainable? $2.7 trillion? Do you know what our entire income tax from everybody in this room and everybody in this country, personal income tax, it's not much over $3 trillion. Think about that. We've increased our debt per citizen. You can see it on the chart. It was $95,866 per citizen. It's $103,432. We've added about $8,000 per citizen in debt. Now, when somebody tells you the economy is pretty good, isn't it? Yeah, right, because they're borrowing in your name $8,000 more in 1 year, and they spent it. Yeah, it feels good for a little bit, not for long. Debt per taxpayer has gone from $250,000, $249,951, to $266,952. That's a pretty unsustainable. You can't keep that up. That's unsustainable. Can we agree on that? Unsustainable? Okay. Elon Musk has said something. You know, he's one of the richest men in the world. He recently tweeted, he said, we need to do something about our national debt or the dollar will be worth nothing. I mean, that's profound, right? Or, duh. We should all recognize it. I mean, that's the guy that says the emperor has no clothes. Right there. He just said it. Do you hear our politicians talking about this? Because it is unsustainable. It's existential for a nation. All right, let's keep going. Economist magazine, and this is May of this year, America's fiscal outlook is disastrous but forgotten. They said the quiet part out loud. I'm going to share with you the quiet part that they said. They said if the Fed holds rates at their current level, the Treasury's annual interest payments per year will reach $1.6 trillion. Think about that. Just interest alone, $1.6 trillion. Now, every reasonable economist agrees. The Office of Management of Budget agrees. The Congressional Budget Office agrees. These are bipartisan. Well, OMB is under the Biden White House, and Congressional Budget Office is technically bipartisan. And you know what they just recently? They just recently upped the amount of debt that they expect that we're going to have to $56 trillion 10 years from now, as rising spending and interest expenses outpace tax revenues. Now, most of the people in this room, I see a few exceptions, but most of the people in this room have lived at a time where we had 10% or higher federal interest rates. Right now, they're 4 to 5% on the Treasury curve, depending on which bond you buy, a T-bill or a 2-year or a 5-year or a 10-year. If you loan the government money, the government will pay between 4 and 5% interest. If they had to pay 10% interest today, we're completely bankrupt. That would exceed all of our income tax receipts. Just think about that. Now, what did they say? Well, the Congressional Budget Office has said that we're going to add $100 trillion to our deficit over the next 30 years. $100 trillion. Am I convincing you this is unsustainable yet? Am I getting you there? Okay, let's go on. Our federal debt today is $35 trillion, and government estimates that are always too conservative say it will exceed $56 trillion in 10 years and $135 trillion by the year 2050s. That's up from $10 trillion in debt when I first alerted the Pentagon. $10 trillion in 2008. $16 trillion in 2013 and $20 trillion in 2016. The interest only at current rates would be $1.6 trillion. You know what it was the last year of Trump, what we paid total in interest rates under President Trump? $368 billion. So it's quadrupled, and it will soon be the largest item in our budget, larger than Social Security, Medicare, defense spending, everything, double defense spending. And interest expense, the more we have to borrow, do you think rates are going to go down or up? It's called the crowding out theory. The more the government has to borrow, the more they have to raise interest rates. Now, you may have heard some rumors out there. The Hill puts this big headline out. Did you know Trump added twice as much to the national debt as Biden did? They did an analysis. It's completely false. Trump did not cause more debt than Biden. They had to jimmy the numbers. They had to start at different points and end at different points, make projections and stuff. Look at that chart there for a second that you'll see on the right of the slide. Do you see that chart? It shows the blue is what the Biden budget debt projections are, and the red shows what they would have been under Trump policies. Do you see the difference there? Congressional Budget Office, and they're trying to tell you that Trump was less fiscally responsible. Now, he spent way too much money, but Biden is spending even more. And we know that because they did an Inflation Reduction Act. How'd that work for you? Okay, so I want to introduce to you why this might be true. For 8 years, a man named Jared Bernstein was the top economic advisor to Vice President Biden for 8 years. And when he became President Biden, he brought him in and made him the #1 economic advisor from the Council for Economic Advisors. This is the #1 guy. I want you to hear his brilliant thinking on how the economy works and our debt situation and all that. Just take a listen. This is from a Finding the Money documentary, and I thank God that they captured this so that I could share it with you.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets, some of the language that some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. Yeah. So a lot of times, at least to my ear with MMT, the language and the concepts can be kind of unnecessarily confusing. But there is no question that the government prints money, and then it uses that money to I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
All right, so two real key points is this is the guy advising President Biden on the economy. And the second point is, well, he talks his language, so maybe he's the right, I don't know. Bottom line is, have I convinced you our debt path is unsustainable? Yes. And the government doesn't know anything about it. That's the scary thing. Well, I want to tell you the second thing that's scary is other nations know something about it, and they've decided this is our weakness, and they're targeting our currency as a result. And I'm going to convince you of that, I think, as much as I convinced you of the first one, by pointing out Igor Panarin. Igor Panarin's the guy that wrote in 2008 in the Wall Street Journal, and if things weren't bad enough, a Russian professor predicts the end of the USA. Now, why would we end America? Why is it going to fall apart? You keep in mind, in 2008, we had the strongest economy in the world, even though we had the financial crisis. So what did Igor Panarin said? He said, mass immigration, economic decline, and moral degradation would trigger a civil war and a collapse of the dollar. Stop there just for 1 second. From 2008 to today, has immigration gotten better or worse? How about economic decline? How about moral degradation? You know, his prediction of a civil war, they made a whole movie about this called The American Civil War. That's not so far-fetched, and that's a scary thing for me. Then he says the collapse of the dollar because the U.S. foreign debt is a pyramid scheme, and he predicted that China and Russia would usurp Washington's role as a global financial regulator. I took this straight into the CIA, DIA, all of the people, and I said, this is what they're working towards. Oh, don't worry about it. Russia doesn't have any power. You know, we're just so much more powerful than they are. You know, we planned to use economic weapons against Russia when they invaded Ukraine, and we just thought we'd just wipe them out with economic weapons. And I said, no, they've been preparing for it since 2008. And they had. And you know, our economic weapons have had very little impact. You think Putin's shaking in his boots? You know what he did? He bought a bunch of gold, and he knows exactly how to transfer money, and he's circumvented all of those. Okay, in 2008, let me tell you what did happen. Vladimir Putin did order Russian holdings of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in the summer of 2008 to be dumped on the market. Oh, Kevin, there you are with your conspiracy theory hat on again. Oh, we're not sure we can believe that. No. Well, you know, I've got a source for it. He was the Secretary of the Treasury, and he wrote it in his memoirs that in 2008, at the Summer Olympics, that the Russians approached the Chinese and begged them to join him in dumping all their dollar-based assets and thus throwing us into chaos. They wanted to jump on us while we had a housing bubble, particularly. And you know, the Chinese said, no, we're not going to do that. And then they reported it to Hank Paulson, who came back to the United States. And then when he wrote his memoirs, he admitted that was true. Oh, I knew it then. And it's been made public by Hank Paulson. So it's no longer a secret, and I can share that with you. But the bottom line is the Chinese did not join them in trying to crash our dollar in 2008. That's the good news. The bad news is when Xi Jinping came to power in 2013, the first thing he called for is to de-Americanize the world. And you know how he said he'd do it? He would end the use of the US dollar as the international reserve currency. And for 11 years, that's the official policy of China, and we've known it. Now, I spoke about this at the Heritage Foundation about that time, and I made this statement. Washington Post had somebody in the audience, and they went out and they wrote a big thing about this, and they said, oh, no, they don't mean they want to get away from they depend on America. No, they're not serious. You can do a web search, and you'll find Washington Post poo-poo's theory of a de-Americanized world and China attacking the dollar, and China's our friend, they would say. Well, guess what? They were wrong. Guess what else? Until Donald Trump became president, nobody believed that China was our economic enemy. But they are. And they've been planning for it for at least since 2013. Now, Foreign Policy Magazine and CNN both have had headlines in the last year or so. China is quietly trying to dethrone the dollar. China continues to de-dollarize reserves as gold stockpiles climb for 8 straight months. These are the facts, and even those on the opposite side will admit they're true. There's no denying it right now. It is obvious. There's a group of nations called the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and 30 others seeking to join. And you know what? I brought the BRICS up in the Pentagon, and I told them this group is formed by Vladimir Putin to destroy the dollar. And they said, oh, no, it's not. Oh, no, BRICS is an investment theme that Goldman Sachs emerged with. I said, no, they have meetings. People don't have meetings for investment themes. An investment theme would be the FANG stocks. You remember FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google. The FANG stocks, that's an investment theme. And they don't get together. If they did, by the way, there would be antitrust rules. They don't get together and have regular meetings on how they're going to achieve dominance in the tech sector. But the BRICS nations get together and decide how they're going to dethrone the dollar. And they're not even hiding it now. They say very public, our purpose is to remove the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. That's what BRICS nations are doing. Vladimir Putin's been doing it since 2013. Xi Jinping joined, or since 2008. Xi Jinping joined in 2013. Did you know in 2008, China held 10% of our outstanding foreign debt? 10%. Today, they hold about 2%. I've got inside papers written in Chinese with translations from Chinascope where they say flat out, we're going to destroy the dollar. How we're going to do it? We're going to destroy it because we're going to convince other nations to stop using the dollar, and we're going to stop buying dollar-based bonds. And then we're going to start selling them. 30 BRICS nations are together on this strategy. And you may have heard the, quote, rumor that the petrodollar was ended. You know what the petrodollar is? In 1974, after Nixon had left the gold standard in 1971, he had to have something to prop up the dollar. We'd just gone through an oil embargo from the OPEC nations, and we had an oil crisis in 1973. And so Nixon decides, we got to fix this. We need a permanent ongoing supply of oil. Saudi Arabia probably needs defense, so we'll defend the kingdom. And here's the deal. We'll buy your oil if you promise to sell oil primarily in dollars, and then when you make extra money, put it into the U.S. Treasury bond and make that the reserve currency. When you have extra money, you hold it in dollars. They agreed to that in 1974. That was 50 years ago. You might have read that a few days ago that the agreement was a 50-year agreement and it ended. And then they quickly rushed out and said, oh, no, that's just a rumor. No, it's just an informal thing. Well, I'll tell you some truths. It happened in 1974 and they denied it in 1976, in 1978, in 1979, and 1984. They denied it. I know because I watched them deny it. But I've got a picture on the wall out there with me with William E. Simon, who was the Treasury Secretary under Nixon, and I know for a fact that he and Henry Kissinger flew to Riyadh and struck a deal with them. They might not have signed an agreement, but they had an informal nodding and agreement. And for most of that 50 years, if you sold a barrel of oil anywhere, it was priced in US dollars. And when the Saudis got extra money, they put them immediately in United States Treasury bonds. And just last year, they stopped selling mostly in dollars, and they started selling in a few other countries. It's still mostly in dollars, but they'll sell oil to China, and they'll take renminbi, or Chinese yuan. They'll sell to other nations. And Russia and China are doing trade that doesn't involve dollars. Is the petrodollar dying? Well, Elon Musk again, I'm going to quote him. He tweeted famously, he said, if you weaponize your currency enough times, other countries will stop using it. Let me give you an example of that. Russia invades Ukraine. We say to Russia, oh, you hold some of your currency in US dollars in American banks. Well, we're just going to take those aside and not let you touch them. Russia says, wait, what? And then we recently said, we're just going to take that money that was yours and we're going to start sending it to Ukraine. Wait, what? What do you think Vladimir Putin says to India when he talks to India? India says, oh, don't worry, you're America's enemy. You invaded Ukraine. We're America's friend. We're an ally. And Putin looks at them and says, you know, during World War II, who were America's enemies? Oh, gosh, it was Germany and Japan. Where are they now? Oh, they're allies now. Okay, things change. But they became enemies to allies. Who were America's allies in World War II? Did that include Soviet Union, Russia, and China? Yeah, actually it did, didn't it? And they're America's enemies now. Things change. So he looks at Modi and he says, guess what? What if the President of the United States decides that you're not celebrating Pride Month sufficiently and you haven't flown a rainbow flag at every one of your government buildings? we might just take some of your money. And what if you're not doing the things that we want you to do in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia? You're not pro-LGBTQ enough. Well, we can't be. It's against our religion. Yeah, well, what if you're not doing the right thing here in Israel, or you're not doing the right thing here? What if we decide to impose our foreign policy and we use the dollar? Wait, are you sure you want to keep all of your country's assets in dollars? Maybe you should bring another currency or two. The BRICS nations are going to have a currency. This is a risk to the dollar. Other nations are targeting our currency. The digital yuan has been created in China. Why? To displace the dollar and to control their people internally. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is the external and internal forces, top down, bottom up. That's the strategy. It is to force at all directions. Now, here it is, China, Russia, an economic friendship that could rattle the world. Look at that, that's this year. And that's in Financial Times. So have I convinced you that other nations are targeting our currency? With reason, but they are targeting our currency. Are you convinced of that? All right, let's go to number 3. Inflation creates a wealth gap that hurts the poor and will lead to destabilization. I may convince you of this, but I think you deep in your heart already know this, that you can't see prices go up 20% in a year or two and expect that you're going to have normal economic times. Okay, so I'm going to ask, does anybody know, just raise your hand if you do, why inflation is created, and as Milton Friedman says, it is exclusively, in the long term, a monetary phenomenon? Do you know why it is? I'll tell you. The definition of inflation from an economic standpoint is when you produce more money than you produce goods. Think about this for a second. Go into an elementary school class and walk in with a box of Hershey bars and say, I'm going to sell these Hershey bars and I'm going to sell them for 25 cents each. You might sell a bunch of them because the Hershey bar is now selling for about $3 at a Quick Trip, right? But what if you walked in and you said, I'm going to give every kid in this room a $100 bill. Every one of you gets a $100 bill, and you're going to have to spend that $100 before class is over. Now I'm offering Hershey bars. Do you know what's going to happen to the price of Hershey bars? Because you only have one box, and now everybody's got a whole lot of money. The price of those Hershey bars is going to go up. They won't pay $3. They might pay $50 or $100. That's what happens when you create more money than you create goods. Guess what we did during COVID? We started sending people money that weren't producing anything, and we stopped production. So we had more money than goods. Too much money chasing too few goods. Well, you think the Federal Reserve would know this, right? So let's ask Jerome Powell and one of his predecessors, Ben Bernanke, and the president of one of the Federal Reserve banks, what they do when they see signs of an economic crisis, what they do. What's their monetary policy approach? Let's listen.
You simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did.
So to lend to a bank, we simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account that they have with the Fed. So it's much more akin, although not exactly the same, but it's much more akin to printing money than it is to borrowing.
You've been printing money.
Well, effectively.
Where does it come from? Do you just print it?
We print it digitally. So we as a central bank, we have the ability to create money digitally.
Flooding the system with money.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no end to your ability to do that.
There is no end to our ability to do that.
Thank you, 60 Minutes, for explaining what the Federal Reserve sees as their purpose in life is to flood the system with money. Okay, other nations that have flooded the system with money that were not the reserve currency of the world. I'm going to put that caveat in because we've flooded the system with money for decades, but we've been the reserve currency. Saudi Arabia had to buy dollars. China had to buy dollars. Brazil had to buy dollars whenever they wanted to do international trade. But what happens if you're not the reserve currency? Your currency's been taken down. Well, you could be Zimbabwe, and you see a Zimbabwe. This is from 1995. This is a $100 Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe note. Right here, $100. This was real money. You could take this at the airport and exchange it, and they'd give you a $20 bill for this, right? So it's 5 to 1. $20 you give them $100 Zimbabwe, you get $20 US back. That's real money, right? Here is 2008. After they flooded the system with money, 2008, Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, $100 trillion note. $100 trillion. I bought a bunch of these as a novelty. I walked through the halls of Congress saying, we're in economic warfare. The dollar's going to come under attack. We need to not be where they are. And by the way, you should have one of these to show your colleagues what happens when you don't have the reserve currency of the world anymore and you print too much money. And they said, I can't take that. I'm not allowed to take that. I can't accept anything of value. And I said, you're in luck. It's not worth anything. But if you think it's valuable, here's what I want you to do. Take the 100 trillion, pay off the national debt, which is 10 trillion, and send me the change. All right, it's not just Zimbabwe. This is a Venezuela note. You can see a picture there. You see the trash in the streets? That's these. This is a 500 million Bolivar note from Venezuela, lining the streets of trash. It's not worth anything. Or you see Weimar Germany, and I've got one of those up here as well. This is, my grandmother left me this. She left me 1,000,000 mark. 1,000,000 German mark. How wonderful is that? From 1923, 1,000,000 mark. They didn't even have the money to print the ink on the back. And you know what kids did with it? They played with blocks of it as if they were Legos. One man went to buy a loaf of bread and he had to take a wheelbarrow full of money to pay for it. Argentina, and I put Argentina up here very excitedly because Argentina inflation hit 124% when they had these stupid monetary policies. Now they've elected a libertarian, and guess what? Inflation has come way down. If you're looking for an escape hatch from America, we might have to move to Argentina. Good beef there, and now the inflation rate's under 10% a month, which is very exciting for them, and it's getting better because they're adopting conservative policies. They understand that too much money chasing too few goods guarantees inflation. And real people get hurt when you have inflation. We have the loss of our reserve status now as a real possibility. We have major inflationary pressures. This is causing higher interest rates, and it's creating a wealth gap. Did you know that the CPI has increased tenfold? That's the Consumer Price Index, a basket of goods and services. The cost of those has increased tenfold since 1971. What happened in 1971? Nixon took us off the gold standard. From 1971 to the present, so I could buy a Hershey bar for a dime in 1970. I was a 10-year-old kid. Buy a Hershey bar for a dime, a Spider-Man comic for 15 cents. I get a cheeseburger, fries, and a shake for under $1 at McDonald's. You know, now that's going to cost $15 a lot of places. It's just gotten crazy, hasn't it? So here's what the big fear is. There's a French economist. He's actually Irish-French economist. His name is Calon, Richard Calon. And he wrote in 1755 that he who is closest to money creation, the king and the wealthy, likely benefit from the distributional choices of currency through the system. What does he mean by that? Let me put it in modern terms. If you live in Washington, D.C., and you're close to the government that's printing too much money, you get a lot of chance to make a lot of money from it. And anybody that's got a few assets can hedge themselves against inflation, like go into the stock market, which has just hit 40,000 or so on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Rich people can protect themselves in inflation. How about lower middle class? How about poor people? Can they protect themselves? No. They live hand to mouth, month to month. And so when prices go up, their wages don't go up as fast. Except in California, where they raised the minimum wage to $20 an hour, and you hit $20 an hour, and as soon as you turn around and you go to Arby's on Sunset Boulevard, oh, they had to close because they can't afford workers at $20 an hour. Or you go to the McDonald's that's still open, and literally it's $15 for a Big Mac, fries, and a shake. Bottom line is prices keep moving up because wages. Inflation's a monetary phenomenon. It's not that people aren't being paid enough. It's we're producing too much money. And rich people can protect themselves and modest incomes cannot. So what happened in France? He warned. What happened? Well, in 1789, they had the French Revolution. We're seeing a wealth gap here in the United States that is destroying the solidarity of our nation. We saw it during Black Lives Matter. We saw it during Occupy Wall Street. Now look, I am in no way in favor of rioting over these things, but I am fearful that those riots will get out of control if we have runaway inflation. And the Pew Research Center has looked and said, yeah, rich have gotten richer and the middle income and lower income have lost ground. That's what we're facing, social instability. So, have I convinced you of number 3? Inflation creates a wealth gap that hurts the poor and leads to destabilization. Are you convinced? Yes. All right, we're going to number 4 now. Governments intend to weaponize currency. It's called central bank digital currency. This, by the way, is their solution to the monetary problem. This is their fail-safe. This is what they're hoping a crisis. You remember Rahm Emanuel, he said, and I quote, "Never let a serious crisis go to waste." So what's the contingency plan when inflation hits? Well, I'll tell you what it is. It's to control people. They don't want to lose their heads to the guillotine. They don't want, Marie Antoinette probably never said, the peasants can no longer afford bread, let them eat cake. She probably never said that. That's attributed to her. She probably never said that. But you know it was true as a sentiment that they just didn't know what was going on. The elites today, unfortunately, I wrote a whole book on this called According to Plan. They know exactly what's going on, and they plan for it, and they're preparing for it. Just like Event 201 in the pandemic. Do you remember that? So here's their plan to take control. And by the way, the last time they said a pandemic is coming, and it got released from a lab in China and so forth, that apparently we've all been funding and paying for them to do this. Dr. Fauci, thank you very much. Apparently, well, guess what? They'd planned control mechanisms based on no science whatsoever. Say 6 feet apart, wear a mask. None of those things work, by the way. They rushed the vaccine, all those things. Guess what? They've also wargamed what happens when the currency collapses. And here's what they want to do. They want to do the exact same thing they're doing in China. Let me tell you what China did. China had a bank run, just like we did. Silicon Valley Bank goes down. Remember that? Just a couple of years ago. Silicon Valley Bank, well, they have bank runs in China. China's in a worse debt position than we are. So people showed up at the bank ready to get their money. Give me my money. And you know what? They pulled out their phones, and all of a sudden it was blinking red because they'd been geolocated by technology at a bank that was in trouble. And all of a sudden it says, you've been diagnosed with COVID. You are forced back into quarantine. You must leave right now. That's a true story. So they had to go home because the government could control them with technology. I'm telling you, our government has a plan to weaponize currency as a control mechanism over you. It's not a conspiracy theory. President Biden made Executive Order 14067. It's 37 pages long. He dated it March 9th of 2022. Read the order. He says the government's going to create their own version of Bitcoin, a digital asset. And all the Bitcoin people got excited. They said, oh, they finally recognized us. Look at the press clippings at the time. They were so excited. But then read the executive order. You know what it said? It said, we're going to be like Bitcoin, except a couple of things. Number one, Bitcoin, well, it's limited. There's only 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be produced, but we're going to have an unlimited production of money. Do you heard Jerome Powell say, we print it digitally. We're going to create digital money, unlimited amounts, as much as we need. So no limitation on government Bitcoin, central bank digital currency. And the second thing is Bitcoin is private. The reason terrorists use it, the reason that if you get hacked, they want you to pay in something, they want you to pay in Bitcoin. Why? Because it's private. They can't trace it as easily. But the government says, no, no, no. Instead of being untraceable, we want it to be trackable. And not only that, but we want it to be used for social good, like diversity, equity, and inclusion, so we can guarantee fairness. So if you're sitting in our audience and you happen to have a background that was privileged, then maybe your money's not worth as much as the person who has less privilege. Maybe you have spent too much on carbon. Maybe you bought too many gallons of gasoline. So we're going to create a currency that will have ability to control. Now, with central bank digital currency, under these papers, it's not your money. You have a use license to it. Do you remember Microsoft used to sell software? You'd go buy software and you'd install it at home. You don't do that anymore because you have a use license and they update it while you're sleeping. Guess what? In the use license that you would click through and agree to, you agree it's their software, not yours. You agree they can inspect your computer for things like hate speech. These are the things you get with use licenses, and they can revoke it if you violate their terms of service. No privacy, everything can be monitored, and the government has a line item on all your spending, and it's all going to be legal because you will agree to it, because they're going to come along and say, we have a new stimulus package. It's going to be $10,000 per family, and we're going to give it to you. You have to take it in central bank digital currency. You'll have a wallet, but you'll get to spend it. And if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. Isn't that what they did with the vaccine? What a privilege it was to get a vaccine until it was mandatory. You don't have to take it. And you'll take it because you'll say, well, I can buy something with it. So I'll take it and buy something with it. And then you'll have a wallet. And then they'll have you. The hook in the mouth with the bait. Now, I want to play for you 3 clips that explain this is the Bank for International Settlements, this is the International Monetary Fund, and this is the World Economic Forum. And they're going to tell you what I just told you in their own words. They're saying the quiet part out loud. Listen.
In particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those 2 issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
Third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contract, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized. For example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion.
And the one final note I will make is that if you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability, units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like, say, ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort.
Did you hear what he just said? Ammunition or drugs or pornography. They're going to decide what's right for you regardless of what the Constitution says. That's the intention from day one. And guess what? You say, oh, they would never do that. Well, Mayor Bloomberg, there's a picture of him holding up a soda. You should only have 16 ounces of soda. But he couldn't enforce it. But with central bank digital currency, if you walk in the morning and buy 1 cup of coffee and you go back in the afternoon to buy another one, and they've bragged about this, they can say, no, only decaf for you. That's the form of control. And by the way, if you're a member of a pro-Trump movement, this is the finance minister of Canada. He says, you ought to be worried that your bank account's going to be taken away. Or if you're in Paris and you don't have the right QR code, you can't enter certain parts of the city. Now, as I understand it, there are certain parts of the city you don't want to enter in Paris because they are gone. This is what we're facing as a future from the control of central bank digital currency. So, Have I convinced you governments intend to weaponize currency? Yes. All right. Fifth point is an easy one. Money is changing in many ways. So shouldn't Texans or Americans have the opportunity to protect themselves? So here we go. Money is changing in many ways. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, PayPal, innovation. Tap to Pay, FedNow, Bitcoin, GPay, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay. If I told you 30 years ago we'd have a cashless future, a few of you might believe me, most of you said, that's crazy. I use cash all the time. Now, do you carry much cash in your wallet? Money's been changing. It's changing right in front of our eyes. And when it changes here, it's going to bring in Big Brother from 1984, George Orwell. This is what we're talking about. So what is money? Money is a unit of account. It's a medium of exchange and a store of value. Unit of account means I can measure things in dollars. I know that my McDonald's meal costs $15. It's a unit of account. It's a medium of exchange. I don't have to walk into McDonald's and offer them wheat in exchange for a burger. We can both agree that money is something we'll exchange. And it's supposed to be a store of value, although from 1971 to the present, it's lost 90% of its value. When the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, from then till now, it's like 98% of its value is gone. You know, biblically, what money is? Money is gold and silver. Historically, what money is? Money is gold and silver. According to the founders, what money is? I wonder what they thought. They thought money was gold and silver, and I'll tell you why. In colonial days, this is a 1776, printed November 2nd, 1776, by order of Congress. I love this. This is very special. It's not worth anything more than the 1 million mark or the $100 trillion. It's actually worth less. However, it does say on here, $4. This bill entitles the bearer to receive 4 Spanish milled dollars of the value thereof in gold and silver, according to a resolution of Congress, which was a great deal, except there was one problem. They didn't have any gold and silver to pay with it when you showed up with it. But why did they use the term dollar? Dollar. This is a dollar. This is what they thought of as a dollar. This is a Spanish milled dollar, which was referenced there. Milled means it was produced on machine. You see ridges around it, so you couldn't just cut and shave off of it. A Spanish milled dollar is 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver. This one happens to be from 1783, 4 years before the Constitution was ratified. 1783, Spanish milled dollar. Why did they say Spanish milled dollar? Well, because they wanted that, or gold doubloons. This is a gold doubloon. They wanted that to be money. They didn't make farthings or shillings or pounds money because that was our enemy, the British. They made this money. The problem was in the Revolutionary War, they said this is a continental note. And they would joke and say, well, that's not worth a continental. It means it's worthless. And you know what? Washington's troops, have you ever been to Valley Forge? Washington troops didn't have shoes. Why? Because they didn't have money to pay them. That's why. This is the problem, was they had a bad monetary system. During the Articles of Confederation, every state had their own money. That didn't work either because you didn't know which money was backed and which wasn't backed. And you tried to exchange a North Carolina note for a Virginia note or a New York note, you had no idea what they were worth. And so in the Constitution, here's the Constitution, they wrote that our unit of currency would be $1. A Spanish milled dollar, meaning 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver, which, by the way, they would cut into 8 pieces. And if you cut it into 8 pieces, each piece was called a bit. And you've heard shaving a haircut, 2 bits, and 2 bits make a quarter, 4 quarters make $1. That's 1/8 of a Spanish milled dollar, also known as a piece of 8. Now, when I tell you the words piece of 8 and gold doubloon, don't you think pirates? Okay, Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution says, no state shall make anything other than gold and silver coins tender within the state. They gave the Congress the ability to coin money. And they did not give them the ability to emit bills of credit, which is unbacked paper money. It's not in there. The courts have added it. And so now the federal government can print money. But they gave them the ability to coin money, and the coin money was supposed to be real gold and real silver. Our founders hated paper money. I'm going to prove it to you with some quotes here.
Washington said paper money opens the door to every species of fraud and injustice. Jefferson said paper is poverty. Hamilton said to emit an unfunded paper as the sign of value ought not to continue a formal part of the Constitution. The founders hated paper money, so they put a pirate money clause in the Constitution for our state to use. Learn more at transactionalgold.com.
We had so much fun when we went to the state convention because we had a pirate money booth and we had bags of pirate booty and chocolate coins and everything. It was such a fun time. And people came to visit us because it's true. The founders hated paper money and they really wanted pirate money. Nope, down with paper money, up with pirate money. And that's what we're here to say. And you know what? The founders left that provision in the Constitution that allowed people to take gold and silver coins, which it's kind of hard to take one of these into a quick trip and pay for your gas. So what they did was they gave under Bank of Kentucky, and I've got a Bank of Kentucky note here. This is a 12.5 cent Bank of Kentucky note produced in 1837. 12.5 cents. What is that? 1/8 of a dollar. This is the equivalent of one piece of 8. So you could take a piece of 8, deposit it in the Bank of Kentucky, they'd give you a note, and you could go spend this, and that made it much more convenient. And you know, in 1837, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 6-1. This is totally constitutional, and that ruling stands today. A state can make gold and silver coin legal tender today. You can put it on deposit, and they can issue out pieces of paper from the state of Texas that would be constitutional. Now, during the Civil War, we did encounter a monetary problem and decided to produce more money than we were producing goods because our boys, both North and South, were fighting each other and killing each other. And so they issued greenbacks from the North and Confederate money from the South. Confederate money, you know, is worthless. As a kid, I used to get some and pretend like it was worth something. It was worth nothing more than monopoly money. Now it's kind of a historical artifact, but it was worthless because they had nothing to back it up. On the North, they had greenbacks, and the only thing backing the greenback was the green ink on the back. There were no money. It was fiat money, completely unbacked paper money. And guess what? People hated it. And what they did is they started demanding that it be backed by something, and they went from a gold and silver standard in the Constitution to a gold-only standard, and they backed it exclusively with gold. Now, I want to tell you, a school child in the year 1900 had more understanding than monetary theory than Jared Bernstein. Of course, that's actually not that hard based on what I showed you. But more understanding than 99% of Americans do today. They understood what money was. It was so well known. It was written up in the book, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. How many people have seen the movie? Raise your hands. Seen the movie Wonderful Wizard of Oz? Quick. In the movie, what color were Dorothy's slippers? Silver. Ruby red. Not in the movie. In the book, they were silver. The movie was Technicolor, MGM. First, you know, it starts black and white, turns to color. They wanted it to pop on screen. So they made ruby red, the color of my darling wife's hair, became the color of the slippers. But you know what? In the book, they talked about, what was the road, the road you travel on? Follow the yellow bricks were gold. The Wizard of Oz, OZ, ounce. And silver slippers on a gold road. That's a bimetal system, and that is the answer to our monetary problems, according to the author L. Frank Baum, who, by the way, wrote about bankers of the Northeast. He called them the Wicked Witch. And the wizard in Emerald City, the Green City, where there was nothing behind the curtain except him, no power, no authority, no anything, that's a greenback. That's why it was there. They had the Tin Man who were factory workers, the Scarecrow were farmers, Cowardly Lion was a politicians. Flying monkeys, they were the lawyers that worked for the bankers. The Munchkins were the citizens, and even Toto was a teetotaler party that was a very prominent political party of the day. Bottom line is, school children 124 years ago knew more than the vast majority of Americans about what real money was. If you read the book, it's filled with economic allegories. Now, we've created some monsters here. The creature from Jekyll Island, you may have read, is the Federal Reserve. It was built in 1913 by a group of bankers from the Northeast who wanted to end the gold and silver standard. They were given that power by Congress. A quasi-governmental private bank was given the authority over our monetary system, and you've seen where that's led us from 1913 to the present. And guess what? They were initially required to back 40% with gold. 40% of every dollar that they put out, they had to have backed by gold. But in 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided that we were going to end that they still backed it, but they took all the gold that Americans... You used to have a gold certificate. You could walk in with a gold certificate. This is a silver certificate. You could walk into the Treasury and you could say, this is worth so much in gold. Give me my gold. But in 1933, the President of the United States put out an executive order and demanded that you turn in all your gold. And they confiscated it. And that was held true to the 1970s, that you were not allowed to own gold for monetary reasons. You could have a wedding ring, but you couldn't have money. Gold is money up until the 1970s. Okay, in 1971, I already told you this, President Richard Nixon decided we're going to end gold convertibility, dollars into gold, and he took us off the gold standard, and he implemented wage and price controls. That was 1971. How did that work in the 70s? You remember very little inflation because we had wage and price controls, or great big inflation? I remember great big inflation. I remember coming home when my mom told me, we are having hamburger helper tonight, but there's no hamburger because we couldn't afford it. This is what we're looking at from when we put all of these controls and go into fiat money. And that's what Nixon did. And our buying power from 1971 to the present, 90% of it's gone away. And that's the Consumer Price Index, which is a very modest look at inflation. Probably understates inflation by a lot. Okay, this is the economic data from the Federal Reserve itself, St. Louis Fed, in August 71, when we went off the gold standard to June of 24, our federal debt went from $405 billion to $34.8 trillion. What we've done is financialized the economy and taken on a lot of debt because we've produced a whole bunch of money and not as much in goods. Okay, so where does this leave us? It leaves us with one option from the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. No state shall make anything but gold and silver coins a tender in payment of debts. We have a plan, not to eliminate the U.S. dollar, but to offer a valid choice for states to offer Americans. And this isn't banking. We're just saying instead of dollars in your bank account, wouldn't it be nice if you had gold and silver? And you could transact in them just as easily as you do in U.S. dollars. We call it pirate money, the founders' hidden plan for economic justice and defeating the Great Reset. Now, people say, pirates? Oh, aren't they lawbreakers? Because conservatives are good law-abiding citizens. I love you all for that. It's fantastic. I'm glad. Pirates, aren't they criminals? But guess what our founders thought are pirates? Well, they named one, the head of the American Navy. His name was John Paul Jones. He was a privateer, and he became the founder of the American Navy. To this day, if you go to Britain and look up in the naval history of the British, they will call him a pirate. And you know what? Keith, who came up and prayed for us earlier, he is a descendant from a pirate that helped us win wars. Pirates helped us win the American Revolution. Even the Boston Tea Party was an act of piracy. So we're going to have to bring back a little bit of that pirate spirit because the government is gunning for us. And it is an unjust government doing that. So let's be a little bit of pirates. And I don't mean breaking the law. I mean following the Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. Gold and silver are constitutional, biblical, desirable, and excellent store of value. Did you know 100 years ago, if you bought a suit, a $20 would buy a fine man's suit, which was 1 ounce of gold. Today, it's almost $2,400 in value. Can I buy a good suit for $2,400? You bet I can. 100 years ago, you could buy a gallon of gasoline for $0.25. And if you still had a 1964 or earlier quarter that was 90% silver, then you would have enough money to buy a gallon of gasoline in nearly every state in America. This is a choice right here. Here's a $20 Federal Reserve note from 1920s. Here's a $20 gold piece. Your great-grandpa decides, or your grandpa decides, I'm going to leave you 10 of these. And you've got a time machine. You go back and you say, Grandpa, leave me, which one do you want? You want 10 of these pieces of paper or 10 of these gold pieces? One's worth $200. The other's worth $24,000. Gold is better. And that's not just over the long term. In 1964, the minimum wage in America was $1.25. If you had the silver content of 5 1964 quarters, you'd have $26.77 in melt value as of yesterday. That's more than enough to pay the minimum wage, and even in California. If you had 10 1-kilogram gold bars in 1924, you could buy a very nice house for $7,300. If you had those 10 bars today, you'd have $760,000. Can that buy you a house? Of course it can. Gold and silver hold their value over time. Okay, who knows this? Everybody knows this. The BRICS nations are stocking up gold. Russia, China, UK, you name the nation around the world, central banks are buying gold rapidly. Are they printing more dollars or buying gold for themselves? They're buying gold for you. They're printing dollars or their currency, whatever it is. Gold has become a tier 1 asset internationally. And the people are holding it in central. Oh, it's a barbarous relic. Oh, no, nobody. You know, China's stockpiling gold. Russia's stockpiling gold. Shouldn't you have gold? The problem with it is if you get that gold, what are you going to do with it? You know, Costco is selling gold bars out, and they're selling within a few hours, like $200 million a month. They're tapping into precious metals. But you know why? The top 3 reasons people don't buy precious metals, it's inconvenient. They fear making an irreversible mistake, and they don't trust the seller. Those are the 3 reasons the average person doesn't buy gold. But it can bring economic safety and economic justice. The problem is gold and silver hold their value, but they're not accessible. So only the well-off can afford to put their savings there. And it's not transactional. This is a direct quote from the Wall Street Journal a little over a year ago. Bitcoin and gold share common qualities. Both are mine, neither is wallet-friendly, and they're virtually useless for buying gas, groceries, or a movie ticket. Beyond that, they're taxed by the IRS as a collectible. How do you even buy it? That was the headline. How to buy gold was the #1 Google search term in April of last year. I don't know how to buy it. How do I buy it? Well, what happens if you buy it at Costco and you walk in with your gold from Costco and you want to buy a washing machine the next month? Costco won't take it. They won't take it back. They don't care. And I'm not saying Costco is being cruel. They just don't know what to do with it. So what do people do? They rush to a pawn shop and they sell it at a pawn shop and they get jobbed at a pawn shop. That's the problem. People are using gold as an ATM that they never had. Poor people are trying to keep track with inflation and they're getting stuck with gold. Gold is biblical and historical money. It's not an investment. I'm not asking you to invest in gold, but it has to be made transactional. I'm going to read you a quote from Warren Buffett that explains how gold has been and what we need to do about it. He said, gold gets dug out of the ground in Africa or someplace, then we melt it down, dig another hole, bury it again, and people pay people to stand around guarding it. It has no utility. Anyone watching from Mars would be scratching their heads. You know what? That's the problem. If you can afford it, you own some gold and you put it in a safe in the ground. And I want to tell you, if you're a believer, you know what Jesus said about the guy that buried his money in the ground? He was the wicked steward that got tossed out. I'm giving you some money, you some money, you some money. Hey, you went and invested it, did something good with it? Congratulations. You did something good with it? Congratulations. You buried it in the ground? Get him out of here. That's bottom line. That's a parable of the talents. So we've got to make gold money again, but we have to make it transactional money. And guess what? There's a technology that allows you to do it. It's called Glint. This is a Glint card right here. It's a MasterCard. You can go and spend gold anywhere you want. What if we, instead of making it a MasterCard and making it Glint, which is in the United Kingdom company, and the gold is stored in Switzerland, and by the way, I've used it. It works perfectly well, but we made a state of Texas card, and you had your gold stored in Texas, and you go spend it anywhere that MasterCard was taken or whatever. This is an Oklahoma version of the card. We've made versions for just about every state that wants it. We can do this. It's in the Constitution. The technology exists. In fact, I've tested it myself, and I'm going to play you a very short clip of where I used it. We just landed in Florida. It's so exciting. We're at my favorite grocery store, and I've brought my gold escudo. This is a gold doubloon. It's got over $100 worth of gold. I'm going to go see if I can buy some oranges with this. Let's see if it'll take my gold to pay for these delicious Florida oranges. There we go. And where do I put the coin? Oh, I'll just use my Glint card and pay that way. There we are on February 2nd, 3 p.m. I paid $5.99 with 0.0914 grams of gold. Success! Florida oranges. bought with gold, paid by Glenn. Now, I love Glenn, but I love Texas. And I want the Texas Bullion Depository. If I lived in Florida, I want the Florida Bullion Depository, the Oklahoma. I want my gold in the United States. And I want my state to stand behind my legal right to use it as legal tender. So I'm going to bring up Mike Carter, who's going to be talking about where we've been in 20 plus states across the country. And he's going to explain to you what we're seeing in these states and why the state has to do it, and it cannot be done just privately by Glent or any other company. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody. You've heard the 5 undeniable truths. Are you believers yet? We need to get this done? Okay. Now, there's a George Washington standing outside that says it's time to implement the pirate money clause. And I'd encourage you each to get your picture taken on that the way out and post it on your favorite social media. But this is where you come into play a little bit. We've got a lot of momentum happening in multiple states, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. But I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about something you can say, okay, I heard all these great things from Kevin. I can't remember all that. But I want you to remember 3 T's, okay? Then I'm going to test you on this afterwards. And there's going to be prizes, valuable prizes. Well, depending on how you value those prizes, okay? But I want you to remember these 3 T's because they're important. Now, before I get into that, let me just say that what started as an idea with Kevin Freeman when he was a boy at about 12 years old. I mean, how many kids at 12 are thinking, we need to be on a gold standard? What did they just do? What did Nixon just do, okay? But God put this on his heart and gave him wisdom to write this book, Pirate Money in Supernatural Time, that lays out a plan that's in our Constitution for such a time as this. And that is just completely amazing to me that exists out there. And what's happened is it's gone from that idea to work through the Institute here to what has now become a movement across the country. And you're here today for such a time as this. You're here to go out and help educate other people about this, to help make this happen in your state. You're all Texans here, but there's other people going to be watching from other states, and we've heard from Alaska and Florida. I had a call from Hawaii the other day, said, wanted to know if I could come out, and I said, well, I think I can probably figure that out. But from all over the country saying, help me figure out how to get this done in my state, and it is happening out there. So it's very exciting to see. Let's say with something that's that positive, you can say, well, who could possibly be against this? Well, we got the caretakers, the current status. What was that guy, Bernstein? He might not be crazy about these. He's still trying to figure out how they print money and what they do with it. There's that deep state out there, right? Then we got those people that maybe don't have your intentions in mind. The Sorels and the Gates, the World Economic Forums. We heard those folks that say, hey, we want to have control. We want to be able to tell people how they should live their lives or how they should spend their money or what they should do with it. And there's those that just don't quite understand it yet. But now let's get into how we're going to make it happen here in Texas. And we're doing that with the grassroots movements, not only with people like yourself, but organizations across the country saying, hey, how can we help get this message out? Texas Eagle Forum, AMAC, Liberty Pastors, the National Association of Christian Lawmakers looked at this legislation we had in Texas and said, you know what, we want this to be a template that other states can go roll out to and make possible there. That happened. The guy that leads that organization said, I've never seen unanimous bill move that quickly through our organization. He goes, there's something happening here, and it is, and that's what's exciting. All right, here's the cliff notes. You can write this down if you want, but I'm going to ask you afterwards. There's 3 T's. Now, we're Texans, so 3 T's should be easy to remember. Okay, the first one is trust, the second one is taxes, and the third one is taking. These are the reasons why we want to make sure that transactional gold and silver happens at the state level under state authority. Kevin showed you earlier a private practice, that's a private business. Great idea. The technology is proven. We got the Constitution. That's proven. But we want to make sure that the state is also backing us because I don't want to go against the federal government, but I feel a lot better about having a Ken Paxton or Attorney General saying, oh, wait a second. I represent Texas, and this is what it means out there. So, we've seen a lot of people as it relates to trust. We'll address the first one, trust, saying, but I don't know how to buy gold. Kevin mentioned that Google search that was out there earlier. And what are some of those barriers? They worry about buying fake or counterfeit gold. Now, I've got this gold coin that Kevin showed earlier that's worth about $2,400 right now. Or I got this coin right here, which I'll sell you because I'm a good guy today. I'll sell you at an even better price. Anyone want to buy this one? Let's see if it's got the... I'm not sure that sounds like solid money. It might sound like chocolate, but people aren't quite sure what to do Am I buying gold that I trust or not? They worry about, am I buying real gold? Well, if I got the state behind it, that gives me one more level of confidence of, okay, I can trust this. I know it's there. Then they say, but how do I store it? They take it, they hide it under their bed, they put it somewhere, they hide it behind a pantry in a Crisco box or something like that, and they hope that no one ever finds it. I've been to the Texas Bullion Depository. We're the only state that has one. It's built like literally maybe better than Fort Knox. You can drive a semi-truck at 80 miles per hour through the front gate, you're not gonna get through it. They have a flag up in front of it, which is very Texan. It says, come and take it. It's got concrete walls, concrete roof. It's backed by Lloyd's of London. It's secure, it's safe, and we get the state behind this, we have a whole nother level of trust out there. Now, some other barriers out there are people think, well, wait a second, I can afford to buy gold. That's just for the rich people. But with this type of technology, we're able to buy as little as 5 cents worth of gold at a time. I have minimum wage workers at fast food restaurants. I'll pay for it with my gold card. And they say, what, I can afford to buy gold? And the light goes on. This is a bipartisan issue. Republicans and Democrats love it. But once they understand that they can afford to buy it, and there's a process to do it to back it up, that becomes a big part of the trust factor that we address there. Now, in Texas, we had this fabulous opportunity for many of us to vote in the last election, Proposition 7, which said Texas legislators should establish authority within the Texas State Comptroller's Office to administer access to gold and silver through the Texas Bullion Depository for use as legal tender. What's exciting about this, folks, we said, okay, do we need to go out and raise money? How do we educate people about this? How are they going to know what this is about? It got 76% of the vote with all organic. Just people said, you know what? That makes sense to me. That's confirmation that, you know what? I want to be able to trust that if I'm buying gold, I can do it, that I can actually spend this gold, that I can do things with it, and I want to have another plan that says, I want to have another way to pay. I want to have a natural hedge against inflation. So, as it relates to trust, is the gold real? Does this check the box? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, where do I store it? Do I have a safe place to store it? Okay, Texas Bullion Depository, pretty good start. Other states want to use Texas or they want to build their own, they can do that, and states are looking at it. In fact, this idea is catching on so much that even Brinks has said, you know what, we got these vaults across the country for money. We maybe should look at converting some of those to gold vaults as well. So that might be another option out there. Can I spend it if I need to? Now all of a sudden it becomes transactional. I went to Chick-fil-A the other day, I bought a chicken sandwich, and I was gonna have my fun at the cash register with the young person behind the cash register and said, I'm gonna buy this with gold today. And usually like, what? We can't take that, I don't do it. And the kid goes, oh yeah, I know about that. My dad told me about that. It's kind of taking my fun away, but it's catching on, okay? Can I hold in small denominations? Yes, all those things happen. Trust is there. Now, the second one is taxes. So we talked about trust. These are 3 T's. This is gonna be the test afterwards. Next one is taxes. Who wants to pay more taxes right now? Okay. What, if you look at the way that the taxes are set up right now, gold, if I have, where's that coin? Did I lose Kevin's gold? I thought I lost his gold coin for a second here. Okay, gold, if you were to sell this, and let's say he bought it a few years back and it went from $1,400 an ounce to $2,400 an ounce, he's gonna be taxed at a rate that's collectible. Why is it considered collectible? Because I can't spend this anywhere. All I can do is collect it, pull it out, look at it, say, man, I feel kind of good, I got this. You know, it makes me feel better, I own some gold in case I need it for an emergency, although I don't know how I'm gonna really spend it in an emergency because how much worth this much in gold for what, toilet paper? I don't know, maybe, if I get desperate enough. But if it's transactional, now all of a sudden it's functional currency. And what does the IRS say? The IRS says that if you can buy a stick of gum with it, if you can pay for your car with it, if you can pay taxes with it, it's no longer a collectible, but functional money. And so the ability for transactional gold and silver to be functional currency takes away that capital gains issue there. And again, keep in mind, as a collectible, you're being taxed more on gold than you are any stock investments you have out there. All of a sudden, this goes away. Now, are we tax experts? I can't say exactly what's going to happen. Will the IRS say, gosh, what a great idea, let's just do that? There might be some pushback, but we've talked to the Attorney General and other Attorney Generals and treasurers in multiple states out there who all say, absolutely, we want to stand behind this and make this thing happen. The third one. So what was the first one? First T, trust. Second one? Trust. All right, third one is taking. Kevin talked about this a little bit earlier, but look at that executive order back in 1933, and let's go back to the future a little bit here. If you go and that says on or before May 1st, 2025, we want everybody to turn in their gold and silver. What would we do if that was just us? We'd say, oh my gosh, I guess I got to do that. Now, the government back then, they were nice enough to say, well, we're going to pay you like $25 an ounce for it, and then a year later they sold it for $33 or $35 an ounce. They made a nice profit, but what happened to us? We lost it, right? That hurt. Why did they do that? What was the reasoning behind that? Roosevelt said, for purposes of this regulation, the term hoarding means withdrawal and withholding of gold coin, bullion, or gold certificates from recognized and customary channels of trade. The term person means individual, partnership, or association. They were concerned about hoarding. They were concerned about money not flowing into the system. What's transactional gold and silver doing? Is it hoarding or is it putting it into the system? It's doing exactly the opposite, isn't it? So that's the beautiful benefit of why we need this to be a state-based transactional gold and silver. And we are, I will tell you, I shared some of those states on the map up there. But state after state, legislator after legislator is calling and saying, hey, help us figure out how to get this done. Give us more resources like these maps that you guys are doing. Help us with the asked questions. Help us come testify. And we are going, and we sowed a lot of seeds last session. As we look into this next session going forward, we are more excited than ever that we are positioned to have some really great wins. I believe Texas is going to lead, and I believe you're going to walk out of here today with your 3 Ts and saying, hey, I heard about this great thing with transactional gold and silver. I'm going to call my legislator, make sure they're supporting it, and I'm going to tell all my friends about it. It's a big idea. What's most important, all the constitutional precedents have been set. Kevin's going to give you just a few more talking points as it relates to the legal stuff, but he does it in an easy way, so don't worry about it. But I'm going to ask you afterwards those 3 Ts. So I want you to remember that and say, all right, how do I make a difference going out here today?
Thank you, Mike. All right, is it constitutional? Can we do it? There have been Supreme Court decisions already made that say yes. I told you about Briscoe versus Bank of Kentucky in 1837. Basically, states can issue warehouse receipts that say we've got precious metal, gold and silver here, and that's legal currency. There's another decision called Bronson versus Rhodes. Bronson versus Rhodes declared that gold and silver bullion is equivalent to gold and silver coins. Because if you read this, it says state can make nothing other than gold and silver coins. Well, Bronson Rhodes in the late 1800s ruled, you know, what is a coin? It's a measure, a certain weight and purity of gold. And the government stamped it. Bullion is exactly the same. And the reason they ruled that is because there was a shortage of gold coins. And somebody said, hey, we have a contract. You have to pay me so many gold coins. And the other counterparty said, yeah, well, I can't find any coins, so I'll just pay you in paper money. And they said, no, 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 no. And they took it all the way to the Supreme Court and they said, well, just give them bullion, dummy. Basically, bullion is just as good. Lane County versus Oregon said states can demand the use of gold and silver. And Nebbia versus New York basically says a state is free to adopt whatever economic policy may reasonably be determined to promote the public welfare and enforce that policy by legislation adapted to its purpose. The courts, including the Supreme Court, are without authority either to declare such policy or when it is declared by the legislature to override it. That's the argument Ken Paxton will take for Texas. That's the argument the Attorney General in every state will take into the Supreme Court. And we better hurry because we've got a court that probably will listen to that argument. We certainly don't want it packed with people who will throw out the Constitution. So bottom line, if the dollar were to fail or be weaponized, we need to be prepared. You deserve a sound choice. We need the money to stay in America. And even other alternatives like Bitcoin or whatever, they may cause greater risk to the system. So we're educating America. That's what the Economic War Room does. Our 300th episode, we've done this week after week after week. We also started Pirate Money Radio, which runs on terrestrial radio on American Family Radio every Saturday morning. We're distributing Pirate Money books, and we're giving educational briefings across the nation. This is our intent to fight back. Somebody asked me once, do you want to be president of the United States? Maybe you could be president. I was like, no, I can never be president. Don't you want to be? And I said, no, I would not. That's not enough power. I'd rather be chairman of the Federal Reserve. This is bigger and better than that because this is our alternative of sound money. Okay, So what should states do? Add constitutional money to their state platforms, make this priority legislation. It's going to be bipartisan if we explain it properly, and spread the word. You can learn more at transactionalgold.com. Let's paraphrase Colonel Crockett. CBDC may go to hell. My gold and silver is going to Texas. Now, you may look at me and say that's impossible. Now, I want to tell you a very quick story to wrap up, and that's the story of the miracle of Dunkirk. You may have seen, how many people have seen the movie Dunkirk or Darkest Hour? They both tell the same story, basically. What you don't know is the rest of the story. If Paul Harvey were here, he'd tell you the rest of the story, and I'm going to tell it to you. Churchill asked the commander at Dunkirk, we have 300,000 men, the entire British Expeditionary Force trapped on this small beach town. The tanks were rolling. Hitler had boxed them in. He asked the commander at Dunkirk, please tell us, what is your status? And they sent a cable with 3 words, but if not. They were very literate in their Bible. They understood exactly the position they were in. They were like those 3 Hebrew children that were about to be tossed into the fiery furnace. And they said, our God is fully able to deliver us. But if not, we will not bow our knees. That was the clear message from the commander at Dunkirk, and he had no hope other than God. Now, what you don't know from the stories that you read or the movies that you watch, you don't know King George VI. You know who that was? The father of Queen Elizabeth. The grandfather of King Charles. The brother of the king who had to abdicate because he married a divorced woman named Simpson, and he abdicated the throne, which, by the way, Churchill helped orchestrate because he knew that King Edward was favorable to Hitler, and he knew that King George was not. So he helped orchestrate. Yes. Oh, she's beautiful. You should marry her. Oh, yes. Oh, who cares what people think? Love is more important than a kingdom. So he did that, and he pushed, and he got what he wanted. And King George VI didn't get along all that well with Churchill. That's true. That's factual. But he knew the dire situation they were in, and he did ask, should I lead in exile? Will I have to leave Buckingham Palace and go to Canada? Am I going to have to leave our British Isle? Because 300,000 men, the entire British Expeditionary Force, was trapped on a small beach town, and Adolf Hitler had Panzer tanks running straight into town, ready to destroy them. But King George VI did something that Churchill didn't do. He called for an empire-wide day of fasting and prayer and humiliation. Get on your faces wherever you are in the British Empire, or if you even speak English, beg God to save this island nation. Get on your faces and ask Him. And you know what they did? They responded. They lined up outside Westminster Abbey for miles. The streets were filled, people getting in for 5 minutes to get on their knees and say, God, please save the British nation. And they did. They begged in India. They begged in Britain. They begged in Canada. They begged in the United States of America. You know, they said the sun never set on the British Empire. And so around the clock, people were begging and asking God to save that expeditionary force. But they were goners. But if not, and God showed up. There was a miracle. There were, in fact, 3 distinct miracles. There's a book on the shelves here called A Trumpet Sounds for Britain. Somewhere you can find it, and you can pull up David Gardner, and he's writing about what happened at that moment in British history. And he will tell you that the first miracle happened because the British were surrounded by Panzer tanks, but they stopped and did not enter the town. They just stopped. Some people say they stopped because Hitler didn't want to get his tanks dirty. And I don't think that's true. It was kind of marshy around there, and maybe no. Others say that Hermann Goering, who was the head of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, he said, Herr Hitler, let the Air Force win this. We'll just bomb them from the air. We don't have to even fight. We can just completely bomb them on the beaches. And that kind of made sense. In fact, one squadron took off and strafed one beach. And on that beach, every soldier dove into the sand, fearful he's dead. There's no way to protect. They didn't have the guns that they could shoot down the planes with. They were just trapped. And the squadron stays to the beach and leaves, and every man stands up. Every man stands up unharmed. They swore something had happened. They told us angels lay on top of them, and they found bullet holes around the bodies where they'd laid, but they got up unharmed. That's a miracle. So the first miracle is the tank stopped. The second miracle is, as they were preparing to bomb those beaches, Flanders Field, which was the German Air Force location, you know, Flanders were dead or buried. That Flanders Field, that's what they took over and made their airfield. A fog fell so thick at Flanders that no planes could take off, and it grounded the Air Force. And then the third miracle happened. Churchill had called up Operation Dynamo. Operation Dynamo meant that they asked, if you have a fishing trawler, a speedboat, a sailboat, a pleasure craft, you're now in the British Navy and you're going to go get our boys. But they couldn't easily make it across the English Channel until God made it glassy smooth, the kind of glassy smooth that you as a kid would say is perfect water skiing on the lake. It was that smooth. And they were able to take the small ships, the little ships. Now, why did they need the little ships? Dunkirk was a beach town. It was very shallow. You could not pull the big British Royal Navy destroyers in and pick the men up. You had to have these long walkways out called moles to get them out there, and the Germans had bombed those, and so they weren't able to put the men on the destroyers and get them out. Instead, you needed smaller ships, the little ships, and God called them up and gave them glassy, smooth passage, and they went the 26 miles from Dover to Dunkirk and returned home with the men. And almost every one of those 300,000 men came home. It was an absolute miracle. Now, there are 3 lessons I want to bring to you from this story. Number 1, we should begin with prayer, because that's what King George did. We start with prayer. We're in a pickle. We're in a terrible situation. Our money is trapped on the small French beach town, basically. Our economy is in real risk. I proved that to you. So what do? We should start with prayer. Then we all have work to do. We should do our work. You know what our work is here? You're the small ships. In this room is the power and the authority and the ability, if you make this your effort, to turn the state of Texas into the gold capital of the United States. And the same is true in Tallahassee, Florida, or Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. You name the state, if the people, as small as this room is, in those states make this a priority and go out and make it happen, they can change the monetary future of the planet Earth. We can do it. You're the small ships. You have work to do. But here's the third lesson. We're going to do this, and we're going to win this, and then we're going to celebrate. We're here for a 300th celebration of Economic War Room as a show. We're going to celebrate with the biggest party you ever saw when we have transactional gold and silver, and when we celebrate, it's going to be a celebration of thanksgiving to God, because you know what happened when those boys came home from Dunkirk? They got greeted by the Prime Minister, Churchill, and he had the stogie in his mouth, and he said, "Come on, boys." And he got up to the microphone, and he said, "Wars are never won by retreats." That was a retreat. That was a Dunkirk retreat. He's right, wars aren't won by retreats. But you know where you're sitting? You're sitting in the Dunkirk Advance Center, DAC, because we don't need to retreat. We're going to advance, and we're going to win this. And he said, immediately, the battle for France is over. We lost that one. The battle for Britain is just beginning. And he was right. Within a few months, the Luftwaffe would be bombing London. But guess what? King George VI said, we're not giving in, and we're certainly not going to do what Churchill just said. He said, we're going to have every man, woman, and child on this British Isle preparing for war. King George VI said, no, I veto that. what we're going to do is we're going to take a day of fasting and thanksgiving and give God the glory for saving our men. And they did. Do you realize how foolish that is in worldly terms? To take an entire day off and give God the glory when you know Hitler's coming? But they did. And I believe in my heart that was the day that World War II was won. The day they gave God the glory. So my challenge to you and to everyone in the audience on our 300th episode is this. We're in a pickle. It's a terrible situation. But if we will pray first, then do our work, and when we have victory, give thanksgiving to God, God will deliver us. But if not, He will deliver us. And that's my call to you. So, I want to ask you, will you join us? Will you help us win this battle? We're going to summarize all this in our free economic battle plan. You can get a copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies, they view it as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room. God bless you all.